Um, Hi. We're doing it live today. It is today laundry day. It's several days. Gotta close that window. It is live today, several days behind laundry day. So I present to you the initiation of casual sermon. It's hot in Utah, but I am cold in the basement. I got to figure out a way to redirect air in here. But, anyways, so I have been working on this sermon. Well, I've been working on this book, All My Prophets Paint, for about a year. And last week, I tried uploading a prepared sermon as a premiere, and it took literally it took literally 12 hours to upload. So we're doing one sermon live. I will then take it down in a couple of days. And then we will post it again with a little more polish to it. So I'm still trying to get one image of the various images I'm going to show you today to compress. So while we do that, let's hymnalize. Let's see here. We shall start with video. Let's start with let's see here. Well, the one we ended with in our last sermon, which is All My Prophets Paint.
All my prophets paint scripture of joy and pain. Though they are gone, their brushstrokes remain. Oh, my seer sees in a starry night a steeple that isn't true, a pillar of godless light. Though I cannot say that this world was made, my world's not in vain, because my prophets paint. Though I'll never be anybody's saint, I walk by more than faith, 'cause all my prophets paint. My priestess knew love, betrayal and sin. She's gone to her grave, but on canvas she lives. My oracle testifies in a killer's blue, oppression and grief, then he was murdered too. Though I cannot say that this world was made, my world's not in vain, because my prophets paint. Though I'll never be anybody's saint, I walk by more than faith, 'cause all my prophets paint.
SpectrumGallery.org is a mission of our godless church, the Church of Korihor. Every dollar that you spend or donate at SpectrumGallery.org goes to helping a child whose family can't afford autism therapy treatments so that they can get the treatments that they need. Atheism has no values, but atheists do. I want to ask you to join us. But if you like art and you care about kids with autism, I personally would be very grateful for your help. Thank you. I love that song. And now, Selfie in black and white. Soon as I go all the way. to the beginning. In December 2009, historians unearthed 9 skeletons from a cemetery in the Tuscan coastal town of Porto Ercole. They were looking for the bones of a painter named Michelangelo, but not the one you're thinking of. That Michelangelo is buried in a monument in a basilica in Florence. The painter being exhumed in this potter's field, potter's crypt, was Pope Francis's favorite painter. And that's strange, considering that in his own lifetime, this newer Michelangelo was hunted by the Vatican because he was a stone-cold killer. This is the turbulent and scandalous life of Michelangelo Merisi de Caravaggio. Caravaggio died at the age of 38, which was young even for the early 17th century. The son of a stonemason who died of plague, he struggled with poverty most of his short life. Orphaned at the age of 16, he was apprenticed for 4 years to a painter in Milan, Simone Pietrozano. Caravaggio primed his master's canvases, mixed his paints, and probably took small commissions off of his master's plates, like still life paintings. Now, painting in oil is a process similar to finishing wood because the paints are made with linseed oil, not petroleum. Ironically, it is acrylic paint, sometimes known as not oil, that is petroleum-based. Linseed oil dries when exposed to air, and so before the paint tube was invented in the 1800s, apprentices would make their master's paints by mixing linseed oil with powdered color pigments of various kinds and in various thicknesses. This develops a very useful skill because working as a painter would involve knowing how to apply paints in differing thicknesses, often adding more linseed oil to thin them out. When Caravaggio left his apprenticeship with Pietrozano, he went to Rome and began working in painting shops to support himself. At first, he would often paint himself since he couldn't afford models to sit for him. One of his early paintings was a young, sick Bacchus. There are going to be so many images here. One of his early paintings, Young Sick Bacchus, depicts him as the Greek god of worldly pleasures, but very jaundiced and pale, especially in his full lips, suggesting that he had hepatitis. If this is Caravaggio as he appeared to himself in a mirror, it is likely a consequence of his bacchanal lifestyle of boozing, but it also could be a factor of lead poisoning, since even his paleness in the paintings was likely made with a color of paint that is called flake white. Flake white, sometimes referred to as lead white, is a color that you can't really commercially buy anymore. It's incredibly poisonous. It was made by placing a roll of lead into specially made jars with vinegar at the bottom. As the acidic fumes would rise from the vinegar, they would tarnish the lead to a white color, where normal air would turn it grayish blue. Flaking this white powder off is what gave it the name flake white, preferred by artists like Caravaggio for its opacity and fast-drying qualities. The first patron to pull him up from a life of austerity was the Roman Cardinal Francesco Maria del Monte. Under the good cardinal's employ, Caravaggio painted at least 25 paintings that are still proudly on display in Roman churches, including the Calling of St. Matthew, which still hangs in the church of San Luigi dei Francesi and would eventually become the favorite of Pope Francis I. The Calling of St. Matthew was part of Caravaggio's first public commission, 3 paintings depicting the life of the evangelist. One of his callings, I'm getting there. One of his calling by Christ, one of his drafting his famous gospel, and one of his martyrdom in a bathhouse in Ethiopia. Each epitomizes the style for which Caravaggio becomes famous: chiaroscuro, or the light in darkness. Shall we look at it? We know from paintings that he left unfinished that Caravaggio would paint from life, with models instead of drawings, in gradients of what was probably bone black and flake white. He would prime his canvases with a thick layer of paint and plaster. He would then scratch the shape of his models into the plaster using a sharp instrument like a nail. This was probably to position the models in the same pose in future sittings. Then he would take flake white and paint a thin layer of white over the skin of his main subjects. This brought up the mid-tone of the earth-tinted primer up just a tiny bit in smooth lines. Because the flake white would dry quickly, he could then add another thin layer on top of that layer, bringing in highlights that were slightly brighter. After feathering those highlights into the first of flake white, he would wait for that layer to dry and then repeat the process, bringing forth the light from the mid-tones of the painting. He would then surround these smooth gradients of skin with very dark colors, including bone black. Bone black was a paint made by charring animal bones and grinding them into powder. So the chiaroscuro of Caravaggio was painted in two kinds of death: poisonous lead for highlights, and the bones of the dead for the darkness. He would then add a layer of glazes into the skin tones by painting thin, transparent colors over the dried layers of flake white, colorizing them. He would feather the dark sides of his subjects into the black background as he went, creating a lost shadow effect and added direction to the main light and character of the paintings. The characters in the Calling of St. Matthew are dressed in the style of Caravaggio's own period, not biblical times. Meant to be relatable to ordinary people, Calling is the depiction of a bored tax collector called from his mundane life by a figure in the shadows at the other end of his collection table. Barely visible, a golden ring floats over the head of this man, almost hidden in the dark: Jesus. In the front of the table of St. Matthew, there is a young man with his back to the viewer, turned in profile and looking towards Jesus, but not at him. This starts a running motif in Caravaggio's work for the church that tells us an awful lot. In fact, the Caravaggio that hangs exactly opposite of Calling of St. Matthew, the Martyrdom of St. Matthew, shows the same character. It might be difficult to see in this, as you're looking at it here. You look way in the background there towards the center of the painting. The Martyrdom of St. Matthew shows the same character in the background, peering on as the saint is murdered. One character that he frequently added into his paintings, you see, was him. Caravaggio painted himself as an observer in his paintings. It is almost as if Caravaggio means to say, I am here in this painting, but I am not the hero of the story. I am the humble servant. One of my favorites of Caravaggio's is the Taking of Christ. I can't find it. In the painting, Judas Iscariot, let me make sure I got this right. Yeah, okay, here we go. Sorry. One of my favorites of Caravaggio's is the Taking of Christ. In the painting, Judas Iscariot gives the betrayer's kiss to Christ as a Roman soldier, depicted like a knight of Caravaggio's own times, pulls him off so that the arrest can be made. Behind Christ, his beloved apostle, John, is facing away and crying out with his hands up, almost as if to warn someone outside the frame that you don't get this, you don't understand. This is no ordinary man. But on the other side of the throng, almost a part of the furniture of the painting, is Caravaggio, holding a lantern that illuminates nothing. Remember what I said about Caravaggio's use of flake white to bring up the value of light in the paintings. He is very careful and aware of the source of light to dip the shadows into darkness and bring forth the illumination. In the taking of Christ, the key light from the reflection in the soldier's armor tells us that there's a soft light illuminating the environment, maybe even moonlight. But the light on the faces of all the subjects comes from Jesus. He is the light, but not for anything else in the scene. Christ's light illuminates men. There is one exception, John, the beloved apostle. Actually, that probably was James originally, but Caravaggio would have known the beloved as John. His face is illuminated with light from outside the frame. It's as if Caravaggio wants to say that John knows the light of Christ in a way that no one else does, certainly not the sinner holding the lantern that doesn't actually illuminate anything. When Pope Clement VIII died in 1605, Caravaggio was given a portrait commission by the nephew of the new pope, His Holiness Paul V. As the pope sat for Caravaggio, neither man could have depicted how Caravaggio's turbulent rise from the streets would set them at odds for the rest of their lives. Old habits die hard, and Caravaggio continued to drink and sin even while living and working in the cardinal's household. Caravaggio's rap sheet was long, mostly related to public drunkenness and violence, including carrying a sword in the capital, which was illegal and for a good reason. He used that sword to kill a rival gang leader named Ranuccio Tomasoni in a street brawl in 1606. He lived the rest of his life on the lam from the monarch in Rome, the same pope that he had painted. Less than 2 years later, Grand Master Alof de Vignacourt of the Knights of Malta appealed to the Vatican to let him take a killer into their order. The wicked murderer sought absolution by taking up the sword in defense of Christendom. If Vignacourt happened to get a few paintings out of the deal, well, whose business was that? The Holy See was surely displeased to learn that the penitent refugee was Caravaggio. But the appeal came with a gift, a painting of the beheading of John the Baptist. I forgot to load that one, so we're not going to look at it. The severed head in the painting is rendered with Caravaggio's own likeness. The artist often painted himself, like I said, in his work as an observer, but this time the message was clear. It was a bribe, a scapegoat to let the bitter cup of Caravaggio's crimes pass from him. Caravaggio's use of chiaroscuro, or light and dark technique, brought to life the boring stories from the Bible and the lives of the saints. How could God's grace not fall on a man whose calling was clearly to glorify Christ and spread his good news for generations to come? Also, I did mention that one of Caravaggio's patrons was the Pope's nephew, right? In July 1608, Michelangelo Merici de Caravaggio was knighted into the Order of Malta. Finally, a son prodigal returned to the fold of the Good Shepherd to be covered in the holy blood of the same. A month later, he tried to kill a nobleman and the whole deal was off. 2 years later, he was found dead on a beach in Tuscany. No one knows what killed him. It has been implied that he died of a stabbing wound from a brawl in Naples. It is quite plausible that the Pope sent someone to quietly make him go away forever. But one of the pervasive rumors about his mysterious death is that he died of venereal disease. Whatever happened, he was buried in a cemetery at the church in Porto Ercole, and in 1956, his bones were moved into a new cemetery where they were mixed in with the bones of other exhumed remains that were being relocated. This fishy sounding reality is that no one knew which remains were Caravaggio's, almost like someone didn't want his remains to be treated like a relic. Of the 9 sets of human skeletons exhumed by art historian Silvano Vincetti in 2009, find number 5 was determined the most likely to be the remains of Caravaggio. This was based on an estimated height of over 5 foot 6 inches and an age at death of 38 to 40 years. DNA comparisons to local families bearing the surnames Maurici or Mauricio showed 50 to 60% compatibility with find number 5. And so it is considered the strongest candidate to be Caravaggio. It is the lab results into what killed find number 5 that drive the metaphorical final nail into the coffin of the mystery of how the artist died and also how he lived. So I'm just checking to make sure that I'm not getting comments that my microphone is off. You know me. The labs revealed lead concentrations markedly above those typical for the period, which is surprising because lead was everywhere in the 1600s. Cups and plates were made of lead, jewelry was made of lead. Lead was everywhere in the Renaissance. So for find number 5 to have more lead in his bones than even an average person of his day meant that he was spending an ostentatious amount of time exposed to this toxic metal. This is very telling in Caravaggio's case because symptoms of lead poisoning often include cognitive impairment and dramatic, one might even say violent, mood swings. If DNA and size were not enough to single out our violent knight of disobedience, lead poisoning seals the deal. The silent assassin that killed Caravaggio very likely may have been the same demon that haunted his life of brawling and boozing and killing his art. Let us fast forward a few years and to the Netherlands. I want to briefly return. Oh, what do I have pulled up here? No. Okay, good. Yes. Let us fast forward a few years and to the Netherlands. I want to briefly return to our story from the first sermon, the suspicion that Jan Vermeer's Girl with a Pearl Earring is a fake. Remember that I spoke of Vermeer's mark being painted with paint that was faded, one of several rookie mistakes in the painting that suggest it's not by Vermeer. Let's go ahead and pull that up. We talked about how the pose and colors are typical of an amateur work and not typical of Vermeer's work, and suggest that Girl with a Pearl Earring is not a Vermeer. One intriguing theory, though, is that it is a Vermeer, just not Jan Vermeer. Benjamin Binstock's 2008 book, Vermeer's Family Secrets, argues that Vermeer's teenage daughter, Maria, likely went to work for her father in his studio, not just as a model, that much we pretty well knew, but also as an apprentice painter. Was she the model for Girl with a Pearl Earring, or was she the painter? Most intriguing, was she both? If you look at a painting that is certainly a Vermeer, Study of a Young Woman, We have to be looking at Study of a Young Woman. Did I not load it? What the hell? Way to screw up, Joe. I'm not doing negative self-talk. It's all in fun. Study of a Young Woman. Bingo. Oh, no, she's in here. Are you in here? Here she is. Anyway, here she is. Bingo bongo. If you look at a painting that is certainly a Vermeer, Study of a Young Woman, you will likely see something very familiar. A Dutch girl looking over her left shoulder, her hair draped in a silk or satin scarf in so-called Turkish style, even though it's not any style that was practiced in Turkey at the time. They didn't care about that. In the shadow under her left ear dangles a pearl earring. But unlike the teenager and girl with a pearl earring, this young woman is definitely a child, 12 or 13 maybe. That coincides with the dating of the piece, which suggests that it was painted when Vermeer's oldest child, he had 10 of them, was about 13. One of Vermeer's other paintings, The Allegory of Painting, or The Art of Painting, I didn't add that one yet. I've been very busy. Bingo. Depicts him seated at an easel at home, painting with young Maria as his model. Laid out on a table next to her, we see several props of paintings. Let me start that on. Laid out on a table next to her, we see several props for paintings, and one of them appears to be the very scarf from Study of a Young Woman. This very well confirms that Vermeer wants to illustrate that he used Maria as a model, but just to make tronies. Remember tronies? Not a portrait of his daughter, but just a pretty picture that would sell as something that you would put in a spare room in your house. The girl is just a girl, not the artist's daughter per se. Why would you put a portrait of the artist's daughter in your house? It should be hanging in his house. The very fact that he took the time to paint this scene is fairly candid, which is very much Vermeer's style. He liked scenes of people doing ordinary things and not looking at the viewer. Sorry, we must hydrate. The movement will be hydrated. Girl with a Pearl Earring, if it is a Vermeer, is part of a series of misfit paintings that break with this candid scene tradition. Another painting from that collection is Girl with a Red Hat. In Girl with a Red Hat, the subject sits in an almost mirrored pose, looking over her right shoulder and also wearing pearl earrings. In both pearl and hat, the subject wears fancy hair coverings, but the subject in hat has auburn brown hair that definitely gives her away as Maria. The color of the scarf in Girl with a Pearl Earring almost seems to give the impression that the model is blonde. Just for funsies. Oh, come on. We can do this. We can do this. We can't do this. All right, fine. Fine. Nope. Boom. Thank you. We can't do that. We're going to have to do this way. These are exactly the kind of details that Vermeer might want an apprentice to place in order to pass the painting off as a tronie, an imaginary girl and not a portrait of his daughter. Both works display the same awkward treatment of hands and slightly slack facial muscles characteristically found in self-portraits. Add one more misfit into this collection, Girl with a Flute. Which depicts another girl with dark hair wearing an exotic hat and pearl earrings. Again, she's looking right at you, almost like looking in a mirror. And she is a dead ringer from Maria, just older than the girl in Study of a Young Woman. That's it. That's pretty much all that we have to go on. But what a fascinating speculation that the Mona Lisa of the North is not only an amateur painting, but a selfie? Consider that Vermeer, who was an art dealer by trade, needs more art to sell because he has financial problems, which he did. So he tells his daughter to take what she has learned from watching him and set up a mirror in the studio and practice self-portraits to sell as tronies. But all of them are girls with pearl earrings. Why did one end up being the girl that everyone admires? A study that tracks eye movement shows that the eye of most viewers tends to move between. Let's pull up girl again. A study that tracks eye movement shows that the eye of most viewers tends to move between the glisten in her eye down to the pearl and then over to the glistening sheen in her lips, and then back up to her eyes, and then cycling in a sustained attention loop, going back to the earring over and over. These details are all in flake white, meant to draw attention in a way that a father might not paint his teenage daughter. They're the kind of detail that a teenage girl might add to herself, like a 17th century Instagram filter. And they are in pearl earring and in red hat and in flute. But why hide that his daughter made these paintings? Why add his own mark and not give her any credit at all? Binstock argues that guild rules exempted artists' own children from formal apprenticeship registration, which would account for the lack of surviving records of any Vermeer assistant at all. And it is possible that Maria only went to work in her father's studio to help the family business until she married in 1674. Her father died in debt in 1675 at the age of 43. The truth is, we'll probably never know. Now there are two sections that I haven't finished yet. I'm sorry. I tried to get the Van Gogh section finished in time. It's so interesting. And then, of course, I have this great update on the story of Beksinski. I'm going to have to add those later, you guys, because I just ran out of time. So we skip to the end. After this, a few days, I'll be posting this entire sermon with those parts added into korihor.org, where a new series will be published in Hellfire Agency, which is making a comeback, by the way. That will be called All My Prophets Paint. And then in the long-term future, we'll be publishing an audiobook that people will be able to buy on Audible. Conclusion. Did I take this down? Yeah. Okay. You know, my first painting is a self-portrait, Crow. Should we do this? All right. I don't know if you can see how much of this you can see, but yeah, this is him. This is Crow, which is a self-portrait, believe it or not. Putting him back. It tends to fall down sometimes. After trying several times and throwing away a lot of canvas, I got to a point over the Christmas season of 2023 that I thought I might give up painting. I was pondering this when I saw a picture of a raven or a crow or a magpie, anyways, facing directly to the camera. And when I saw it, it was very clear to me that this image would haunt me. His looking at me made me feel introspective, like he was exposing to me how I looked out at the world. His eyes remained with me after I looked away. In my mind, for the first time, I experienced what I think painters refer to as perspective. Half of the image is me as I am seen by the world. Half is me as I look out to the world. And the inside and the side from inside of me is filled with rage and fear and anxiety. Once this painting was in my mind, I couldn't shake it until I painted it. Where other failed paintings had taken me weeks to give up on, I finished the whole painting of Crow in just 72 hours. My next painting, Social, we're already into this, so let's do it. Social. We're not covering up Daughter of Alderaan because Jules is here and it's her favorite painting, which I haven't forgotten. I do like Daughter of Alderaan. But I look at her all the time. She's like right behind me. It is illegal. Okay, sorry. My next painting, Social, is a bad rendering of my face with glass and nails shoved into my eyes and sinuses, a representation of my experience of having a panic attack while stuck on the I-15 in heavy traffic. You ever get that? You ever get that panicked feeling that says you stopped recording? Okay, sorry. A representation of my experience of having a panic attack while stuck on the I-15 in heavy traffic, surrounded by people and their cars and their judgments and frustrations. It wasn't until I had painted Social that I saw what I really needed to express about what I hate about myself as a human and hate about humanity as a consequence. It was remarkably therapeutic. In a way, every painting is a self-portrait. It is the artist saying, I am here, but I am the servant, not the subject. Remember that I told you that before the discovery of lead in Caravaggio's bones, it was assumed that he either died from an infected stabbing wound or from venereal disease, from a wild, or from venereal disease from all the wild sex he was having. That largely was an image of Caravaggio from a book called The Lives of Painters by Giovanni Baglioni. Baglioni was not an art historian. He was a painter. In fact, he was a Catholic painter of church paintings in chiaroscuro. You see, Baglioni was one of Caravaggio's rivals. In the book, he is relentless in his portrayal of Caravaggio as a sinner. But he goes even further and suggests that Caravaggio painted from life, including himself, because Caravaggio couldn't draw. You see, Baglioni painted from sketches and studies that he did based on other artists' work. He painted from sculpture and from etchings, and he drew incessantly. Caravaggio, if he had sketchbooks, must have thrown them away. But to say that he couldn't draw is ludicrous. He drew in paint. But more than that, there's something remarkable. Did I not load Philly Day? Ba-ba-bang. I did not. Oh, because I was compressing it. Remember, that's how we started this. I'm going to show you one painting of this woman. And this one, you're going to look up at the woman in the far right side of the corner with her hands raised. But there are several paintings of her. Filide Melandroni was a well-known courtesan in Rome. But under Caravaggio's flake white lantern, she became the ex-prostitute Mary Magdalene, explaining in one painting to Martha how Christ has brought her out of a life of sin. She is the righteous widow Judith, exacting justice for her people. And she is the humble St. Catherine of Alexandria, resolutely holding the blade that will make her a martyr. And in the entombment of Christ, she is likely reprising her role as Mary Magdalene. Because this is what Caravaggio's lantern did. Illuminate the best of ordinary people. And I think that's what Baglioni really resented. Some of the ending of this is improvised. All of this is going to be improvised. Caravaggio didn't paint from other painters' work because what made Caravaggio's paintings was his depiction of real people just being real. When he saw Filide Melandroni, he saw Mary Magdalene. He saw a prostitute who was not born a whore. She was born just like everyone else. I think that's why in his paintings, Caravaggio had the faces of all the people, including him, illuminated by Christ. A light that touched nothing else, just people. It's as if he wanted to say that all people are born with the light of Christ, meaning nothing more than that they are all born good. That there is something intrinsic in us. It exudes from within us. And like the calling of St. Matthew, all that Christ does is to call it forth. There's a young man next to Caravaggio, just to the left, if you're looking at this painting right now, that is a boy that Caravaggio befriended in Rome. I forget the young man's name now, but he's in many of the paintings with Caravaggio in the paintings of the life of Christ, the life of Christ, but also in this case, in the life of St. Matthew. Let me pull that one up again, the martyrdom of St. Matthew. If you look to the left of the man who is stabbing St. Matthew, you will see very faintly the image of a man peering. That's Caravaggio. But if you look directly left of Caravaggio going straight over, you'll see that same boy depicted in the same scene. Now, of course, he only had so many people, so many models to work with, but this is what Caravaggio did. Any person standing in front of these three paintings, including one I haven't showed you here, which is the drafting of the Gospel of Matthew. That one's a whole story in and by itself. He wanted to show that there was a betrayal, that there was somebody, I think he was trying to portray that you could be sitting next to Matthew when he was called forth from his life as a tax collector and then be standing there when he died and be the same person and miss that this was a person who had light born inside of them. The same kind of light that exudes from a prostitute who is a saint, who is a minister for Christ. Remember, in the entombment, look again at the light of the people. Christ is dead and he is glowing. He's the main source of light. And look at all these people looking down. Look at Mary, the mother of Jesus, looking down, her face illuminated by Christ. Look at, I presume, Peter standing here, also illuminated by Christ. And then you see the woman with her face turned down, likely Martha, and likely also posed by Filide Melandroni. And you see the shadow cast on her face, but you see the light where her nose is, that she is also receiving the light of Christ. And then you have Mary Magdalene looking up to heaven. And like John in the earlier painting, in the painting of the taking of Christ. So it's a lot of paintings. Just like John looking away, she testifies to the world outside of the painting. Not with Christ's light reflected from him, but exuding from her, exuding from John. They were his beloved. They were the ones who would bear his message forth into the future. This is what Caravaggio was trying to show us. I worked an awful lot on this sermon in the past week. A little stunned I got it done in under an hour. But this is what I get from this painting. That each of us, remember in my first sermon, I talked about that you are a story that knows that it's a story. And the day you forget your curiosity of how your story ends, you start to die. Well, similarly, what I get from these self-portraits, including, unfortunately, I couldn't finish in time the painting of Van Gogh's painting of his father's Bible, or the incredible painting of Zdzisław Beksiński, and what I believe is him with his wife, Sophia. Just a heartbreaking story. What these artists bring forth with their self-portraits, even if the self-portraits don't look like them, as the case with in Van Gogh's painting, it was his father's Bible, and then his own copy of the book Joie de Vivre. And then in Beksiński's case, it was a picture of two corpses wrapped up in each other in a pose that at the base of the picture is distinctly sexualized. But at the top of the painting, this is something Beksiński did, is he would make the painting so that as your eye followed from the top down to the bottom, it told a different story. You have two characters. Maybe I will talk about it. I think I have this image here. I'm sorry, you guys. I'm trying to make this as fluid as possible. Do I have a picture of, is it an AA84, I think? I don't think I have it, you guys. Shit, I'm sorry. All that lead up, and then I didn't even have it ready for you. Let me just pull it up, because this is really cool. I love Beksiński so much. Let me just pull it up in a window here. No, let me download it. Save images. Sorry, guys. I'll get it. I'll get it. Just bear with me. I'm on one right now. You get to see some of the process of how I write these, because this is a little bit raw. Be my downloads folder. Oh, screw it. Oh no, it would be back in Corehor. Oh, for hell's sake. Oh, there it is. Okay. Oof. Sorry. Are you kidding me? Well, take one of these out then. You can only have up to 10 images. Sorry. We were on a roll too. Okay. AA84. Yeah, AA84. Okay. So you see this painting of these two figures wrapped up. They are representative in a way of death. And there's a larger figure, we'll go ahead and say a masculine figure, holding a smaller figure, maybe a feminine figure, in an embrace that you see at the base. It looks penetrative. But look at the way their arms are enmeshed into their bodies at the top. And you see an almost parental love. Sofia Bekshinsky was one of Zhezhlow's models when he was a photographer trying hard not to become a painter, who was educated as an architect. In other words, everything that his father didn't want him to grow up to be. His father was disappointed in him because he didn't learn a more practical trade, in spite of the fact that he was the grandson of an architect. I mean, this was a family tradition. His father, his grandfather, great-grandfather, I think it was one of the fathers of Sanok, Poland, where they were from. But his father was Zhezlow Bekshinsky's father was a very practical man, very pragmatic man who had fought with the Prussian Blues. They were an army that had, mounted together with foreign located, Polish expatriates to fight against the Germans in World War I. But by the time that Poland was invaded by Hitler in the 1930s, Bekshinsky was just a small child. So Bekshinsky grew up under Nazi occupation. And his father always expected him to do something practical with his life. But his mother was an amateur painter. And she wanted him to paint and taught him to paint so that he could get his feelings out, which in retrospect, he probably should have encouraged his son Tamak to do too, because his son Tamak had a lot of emotional problems. And we'll get into that in future sermons. And he tried to paint like his father, but he couldn't, he quit early, as most people who take up painting do. And the story gets really sad, but luckily you don't have to hear that one right now. But I look at this painting. What's moving to me is that Sophia had a lot of emotional trauma, and so did Bekshinsky. In the turbulent life that they had with his mental illness and with her strained relationship with their son Tamak, both of them had very strained relationships with their son Tamak, who would fly into violent rages and would often hurt himself and hurt other people. He would destroy and tear things down. Sometimes Zhezlow, towards the end of his son's life, their life together, Zhezlow, who was a very awkward person, would take out a video camera and record his son destroying their home in Warsaw. He was fixated and fascinated in his son like he was just a subject of his paintings, but it was his son. And then they would try to resolve Tamak's emotional issues. But the thing is that Zhezlow wasn't that much different. his obsessive compulsive disorder, which I actually think probably bordered on autism, but that could be me coloring his experience with my experience, led him to be a recluse, led him to be vulgar in his descriptions to people. Some people would say, in fact, that Beksinski sometimes would describe things to them in a way that made it sound like he was trying to get a rise out of them, like he was just trying to provoke them, and that he would just keep going until somebody gasped or said something, like that. That's enough, Zhizhla. He would describe, death. He would describe sexual things. He would describe vulgar things, and then just to try and get a rise out of people. There was a lot of Tamak in his father, and a lot of Zhizhla in Tamak. But Zhizhla could paint, and Tamak couldn't. He tried and he couldn't do it. I looked for a long time. I'm going to share this in this painting. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a future sermon I've been writing. A lot of Beksinski's early works depict a small child, a male child, whose body is exposed or in some way mishandled by an adult female. In one of his sketches that really haunts me, I definitely can't show you here, an adult female is looking down on this male child who is basically crucified on a small cross, and her face exudes light down on his exposed body. And I thought, when I saw it, this man and his relationship with his mother is complex, shall we say. And I started going through his letters and his journals and writings. I had to translate them into English. Of course, they're all in Polish. This kept coming up again and again, this adult female with this male child, in vulgar ways, graphic ways, violent ways. And all of the depictions that I got of Beksinski's relationship with his mother were of kindness and love, compassionate and careful, loving relationship between this man and his mother, who lived with him until she passed away in Warsaw. They moved with him from Sanok to Warsaw after her husband passed away. And his mother-in-law, Zofia's mother, also lived with them until she passed away. And then Zofia passed away. And Tamak passed away. And Zhizhla was left alone until he was murdered in 2005. At the end of his life, he wrote to a friend and mentioned to her about how his painting had become a way that his mother had taught him that he could get his feelings out in canvas that he couldn't manage to get out in words. And in this letter, I wish I had it pulled up in front of me, he says that he was molested by a nanny when he was a child in the cradle. I wonder if I have that. There, so much suddenly made sense. I have that painting here. I don't think I have it. There's a painting that Beksinski did of a character in blue, draped in blue, standing over a cradle with a big capital R on it. I still don't know what the capital R is. And on the front facing side of the cradle, facing towards the viewer, is a crucifix, Christ on a cross. The whole scene is set sunken down inside the basement, inside the foundations of what looks like it could be a church, but it's just the foundation sunk deep, deep down. Up on the wall in Latin is inscribed. Um, in Latin, it says in Latin, "By this sign you will conquer," which is what uh, tradition holds Constantine saw in the battle when he was converted to Christianity. Wasn't really, he just decided to decriminalize Christianity. But by this sign you will conquer. And then next to that in Latin, that Latin phrase, is a figure crucified against the wall, and his blood and offals smeared down the side of this hole, almost as if to say, this is the church, but it's not the church. It's the hell that holds up the church. It is the deception of the church. And the Christ that was here is gone in the corruption of Catholicism. And the corpse has been picked clean by vultures. It looks like they could be like vultures or, anyway, some kind of birds, a big flock of birds. And his head has been taken off. His legs have been picked completely clean of all their flesh. And then underneath there, down at the bottom, are two figures, one of them chained to the wall. And it's just a furry creature, an otherworldly creature that he often included in his paintings. And its head, a white skull, has fallen off and been removed and is next to the body, but the arms are chained to the wall as it crawls towards the cradle. And then next to the cradle is another figure just like it, with their head still attached, but collapsed down like it tried to reach the cradle but didn't quite make it and died, leaving only the adult figure in blue, draped in blue, standing over the cradle and reaching in to touch the child. I said that Beksinski didn't title his paintings because he didn't want his words to tell other people what the paintings meant to him. But when I learned this detail about his nanny from back during the days of the occupation, I realized that Beksinski probably didn't title his paintings because they kept family secrets. He couldn't get his trauma out any other way. He had to paint it because he didn't have the words. I don't know this for sure because, again, Beksinski didn't leave us a lot. But was the beheaded figure his father? Who was disappointed in him and lost his head because he died very young? And the figure who tries to crawl to the crib to save the baby, but dies in the process. Is that his mother? What connection did his nanny have to the church? I don't know. I still have not found anything that indicates what their connection is, but I know that when he died, he was an atheist. All of Beksinski's paintings are self-portraits. Like Caravaggio, he painted himself as a witness in his paintings. He wanted to testify to the future. I am here, but I'm not the hero. I hold the lantern. We're all born one way. And like Crow, we all look out at the world and we don't see ourselves even when we look in the mirror. You think about it, when you look at a mirror, you're seeing a mirror version of yourself. That's why people find it an uncanny. You've seen those, they have systems where you can see what you really look like, where they have set up a camera and then they set up a monitor so you can see yourself, not mirrored, but actually as you actually are, and you don't recognize yourself. You look totally different than you actually do. So you see the world, you look out to the world like one half of Crow, knowing that you look from the outside like the other half of Crow, but you look at the world through your own eyes, and no one sees that world but you. That is us. Like Caravaggio, illuminating the light of Christ in every individual person. He had no idea that so much of his rage, so much of his boozing, so much of his inability to control his emotions was his art slowly killing him in Flake White. If you take Flake White out of Caravaggio's experience and out of who he was, is he still Caravaggio? Would he have been better off? Would we have even known who he was if Caravaggio had died in the plague with his father? Would we have known who he was if he had never touched Flake White, if he had never gone to Peter Zano's shop and apprenticed for him in Milan? Would the world be better off without the trauma that was slowly killing Caravaggio? No. Like Beksinski's nanny. Like Van Gogh's disappointment with his father and with seminary life when he studied to become a minister like his father and eventually gave up on God. Our trauma informs who we are. We don't live in a world with free will. It's hard to imagine. And maybe I'm wrong, but I feel very confident. We don't live in a world with free will. But I'm a compatibilist. We have to treat ourselves as if we do live in a world with free will, because even the idea that you have no free will is a factor inside your brain. So if you give more attention to the fact that you have no free will, or more attention to the fact that the idea that you should act as if you have free will, whatever that idea is, it's part of the environment inside your brain, like lead in Caravaggio's bones and in his brain, in his blood. We are all born full of potential, but it is trauma that makes us who we are. It is how we survived. It is how we lived in the moment of our trauma. It is how we dealt with our trauma that tells the story. And meanwhile, we understand, and it adds anxiety to our lives that somebody else looking at our story, like Baglioni, will tell a version of the story that's not real, like one half of Crow. There's a version of the story that someone only sees because they look from the outside and judge from where they are. Like in Social, you can become overwhelmed with feeling like you are being surrounded with the judgments of other people, and even with the judgment of your ancestors or the judgment of God, that at the end of the day doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, your experience dies with you. We'll never know. No one will ever know exactly what it was like to be on the red side of Crow. Nobody will know it entirely. What beautiful thing it is that somebody like Beksinski was able to learn to take the inside of Crow and put it out in paint. He could never photograph that, not accurately, and he tried hard. He got into graphic arts at the end of his life, and frankly, they really sucked. It wasn't very good. And when he needed to really get his feelings out, he did it in paint. Caravaggio painted an underestimated lady of the night, a prophetic beggar who was there. There are a few characters in his paintings that we know are artists who are friends of his, or the boy who he befriended in Rome, or himself. But most of the people we know because of Baglioni. It turns out the people that Caravaggio painted were poor people, beggars, literally, or people who lived in the streets and slept rough, people who had ordinary, mundane jobs. Some of them we know their names, like Felice, but many of them we don't know. They've been lost to history. And that's what Baglioni hated about Caravaggio, I think, because his figures were from great artists, sculptors, and a friend of his, I forget the man's name, who made etchings. He would study classical art and bring it to life. And so when he looked at Caravaggio, when he would be compared, I'm sure, to Caravaggio's paintings, and people said, why don't your paintings look real? Why don't they look like real people like in Caravaggio? I'm sure he resented Caravaggio for that. So, of course, the version of his story was, Caravaggio was gay, right? That he had sex with men. That he had sex with people from all over. That he probably died of venereal disease, and he couldn't draw. It's all Baglioni getting pissed off about Caravaggio being, frankly, better than he was. I won't show you his paintings. They were fine. They weren't like Caravaggio. We all know that our story is being told by other people and it's being told wrong. Somebody says about you that you are always depressed, that you're promiscuous, that you're a drunk, that you're lazy, entitled, too self-important. There's always, there's something somebody says about you. And if you allow that person to tell your story inside your mind, again, you lose. Remember I said, you die the day you give up on your story. You can't let your selfie be painted by someone else. Like the girl with the pearl earring. You paint it the way you see yourself. Who knows what kind of lip gloss Maria Vermeer may have had that made her lips glisten in a certain way. It probably was flake white. It was probably her. Probably at that stage, probably 17, somewhere around 17 years old, which makes sense because that's also how old Scarlett Johansson was when she portrayed her in the movie Girl with a Pearl Earring. And here you have the girl from Study of a Young Woman. But when she paints herself, she wants people to see that she's pretty. She wants people to think of her as a sexual being or as an adult. That's something that Vermeer probably wouldn't have painted, but something that she would paint for herself. And we would be, it makes you kind of go, eh, because we're talking about a very young person. But at the same time, we have to give her room to express herself. And all of us remember being 17. Remember the things we did. If she was a boy, she'd probably paint herself with slightly bigger muscles and and no sleeves. Or like Caravaggio when he was I think 20, his early 20s, 22, 23, when he painted the calling of St. Matthew. And you'll notice in the painting, here, let's pull this up. I know I'm going long. Sorry, guys. But look at this painting again. Notice something off of Caravaggio's left hip in this painting. What do you see there? A sword. Do you remember I told you this scene takes place in Rome, even though, of course, the scene in the Bible takes place in Galilee, right? Or in Jerusalem in biblical times. But of course, Caravaggio painted for today, and he painted himself today in a painting in Rome. He paints himself wearing a sword, which is against the fucking law. How great is that? And it's the same paint and the same sword, probably, that he used to kill Tomasano, whatever. Now watch this. Look at this again. I wasn't going to do this. Now the painting that hangs right opposite of it in that Catholic church in Rome. Look at this. Look in the hand of the man who's about to stab the same man, about to stab Matthew in this bathhouse in Ethiopia. He's holding Caravaggio's sword. The sword, just a couple years later, he will use to kill a man on the streets of Rome. Our trauma in life is our story. You let somebody else tell it, you better not believe it. Other people will talk. Other people will try to sell you their version of you. And maybe they see things about you that you don't see about yourself. Sure, it's good to get an objective perspective, but not at the cost of your self-portrait. You are painted in the poison of your trauma. Your flake white is in your veins. It's in the cells of your body. It's in your brain all the time. Carry forward with the painting of the light inside. Bring it up. Use your flake white to bring up the highlights and say, I was born good. My trauma meant to make me darkened like bone black. But the white, the flake white that brings up the value in the color of my life is who I really am. And one day, you and I, we won't be here anymore. And was our pain from nature or nurture? At the end of the day, it just doesn't matter. It's knowing that light inside that matters. Whether the outside world can see it or not, it's unimportant. It's that light inside that makes you who you are. It isn't there in spite of your trauma. Your trauma helped to make it. Our lives are painted in trauma. Our lives are painted in pain. And rather than being ashamed of it, rather than expecting that we shouldn't have had it, rather than expecting that our lives should have been innocent and free, we should embrace it and remember that this is what being alive is. And come back to this moment and illuminate that goodness that you were born to. They did find in Caravaggio's bones that he had been stabbed, though. So either that or the Pope had him murdered. Amen.
This is my one chance to prove Hitler wrong. Jesse Owens, one chance. I knew all along. This one chance to make them see I have one chance to prove it to me. Raised in Ohio, the Klan couldn't break me. The Buckeye bullets, golden opportunity. Now I'll reach for that goal. Take my race to Berlin. Rock this old world with the heart to win. It's my one chance to prove Hitler wrong. Jesse Owens, one chance. I knew all along. This one chance to make them see I have one chance to prove it to me. Swift up, swift down, this bullet will fly. The world will see Jesse's reason why we live and we die. My only race to win is Jesse Owens' heat. This is the bullet's race within. This is my one chance to prove Hitler wrong. Jesse Owens, one chance. I knew all along. This one chance to make them see I have one chance to prove it to me. 4 golds later, he made it clear how he felt. Didn't shake my hand, nor would Roosevelt. Now I am gone, brothers all, our race goes on. This is your one chance to prove Hitler wrong. This is our chance. This is our song. Take your one chance to make them see. Take this one chance and race with me.